But Charlie Brown Christmas Special, I mean,
I'll just watch it to hear Luke 2 read on broadcast television. It's fantastic.
I thought when you said Luke at first, I thought you were talking about Star Wars. So. You're talking about the Bible, though. It's good. Our goal in this podcast is to know Jesus better, and by the power of His Spirit, do better, so together we can be a little better. Hey, welcome to A Little Better. My name's Daniel, and today on the podcast is the normal crew. Week 3, we wrapped up our Christmas series. Now, Christmas is this week coming up. Christmas Eve services this weekend, but this past weekend, Drew, you talked about week 3 of our Christmas, Where Are You Christmas series, and you talked about Herod. Give us your sermon in 60 seconds.
Yeah, we zoomed in on Herod, this kind of crazy lunatic king who did everything he could to fight against a new king, King Jesus. And so, when you look at Herod's life, basically it's a good reflection of the fight we face, just in a lot of different ways, right? Maybe our fight isn't as extreme as killing babies, but we fight for control of our lives, to have the say in our lives, to be the leader, the king of our life. And so we just kind of landed with like who is the ultimate king in your life? Who sits on that throne? And ultimately, the throne never belonged to Herod or me or you. It's always been Jesus. This is just a matter of if we're allowing him to sit on that throne. And so, and out of that, the casualties when he's not on the throne, and the type of king Jesus really is. And we got to see all of that.
Yeah, that's awesome. Herod is not a person that when we think about the Christmas story that we think is a primary character, but he really is. He takes up a lot of space in Matthew chapter 2, which if you look at the chapters of Christmas, it's like Matthew 1 and 2, Luke 1 and 2.
He gets a good chunk.
That's about it. But Herod takes up a good chunk, because usually, I think somebody brought up, Michelle, I think that brought up in pre-preach, usually when we preach in Matthew 2 about the wise men, it's kind of like, oh yeah, Herod, he's not good. He killed the babies, but the wise men, but I love the idea, zooming into Herod's response to Jesus, because it's not normally a Christmas message that we hear, talking about that.
I always wonder why the nativity scene doesn't have like Herod like somehow in the background or on the top of like the manger with like a sword.
What's funny is like my New Testament professor in Bible college, his wife, he'd always say his wife wants to do a nativity scene, but he said, unless I can do a pile of baby dolls with a sword through it and ketchup over it, we won't do it. And I was like, that's a little that's a little grotesque.
Dark.
I was like, you need all the elements and no drummer boy, and that's what he always would say. I was like, oh, it's like, okay. Oh, nice. So Herod in this regard, man, he just takes up so much space of who he is. You did, I think, a hot take in this regard. You said Herod is the most relatable character to us.
Sure, people love me
in
for
the Christmas story.
Yeah,
I'm just glad that you dropped that thunder bomb, because last week after I said there probably wasn't a donkey, that was the most hotly debated. My wife literally, we were getting ready for bed Sunday night, and I was like, "Hey, you never told me what you thought about your message." She's like, "I was a little offended," and I was like, "What?" It's like she's like, I don't think it messes with my theology to say that there was a donkey and that donkey carried a king. And I was like,
I think we have to let our
star?
audience know, in your wife's defense, she's pregnant right now.
Yes.
And the thought of traveling, probably that 4-day journey, was
Walking.
like, no, there was a donkey.
There was a donkey. Mary was right.
Mary rode that donkey.
Yeah. Joseph was not that cruel. There was no donkey.
Yeah. And so that was, I'm just glad you took the eyes off of me with saying there's not a donkey. And,
I stepped into it.
Well, that was kind of like the punchline of the message, right? It was like the hit you in the gut type thing. And it was something that I wrestled with for a couple of days. Like, okay, am I exaggerating here?
Yeah.
Or is this like just like a sermon Jesus juke to like convict you? But I'm like, no, I think it's actually true. Like, Herod is a good depiction of humanity, right? We are born in rejection to God. We are born in this fight of, God's Spirit drawing us, and yet we don't even want to be drawn. We don't want to surrender to a new king. We want to be king. And
but overwhelmed by all those details, right? I mean, killing his immediate family, killing all
Yeah.
the babies in Bethlehem,
Yeah.
also killing immediate family.
Right.
Yeah.
Like,
You
everything
call me that
and
guy.
It's just like, how is he relatable? This
Good action
like
set.
mass murderer,
Don't kill your family.
in control.
That's good.
I think I'm kind of reminded of Jesus' teaching, when he says, don't kill anybody. Like, I'm not going to kill anybody. He goes, but you've been angry in your heart, right? You have this rage. And you didn't commit the act, but it's the heart, that matters. Yeah. And so, no, we didn't, it's kind of like if we had that power, if we had that prerogative,
Right.
if it was at risk, right? Here's all the power I have, and it's at risk.
I think that's the biggest disconnect that people don't connect, right? Is Herod had an enormous amount of power that we don't have, right?
Right.
And so, right, and maybe for like good reasoning, right? Maybe we would be like Herod if we had his level of authority and we're so afraid of losing it, right? We're afraid of losing control of small things in the things that we do to protect the control of just the little things.
Yeah.
And so I think the disconnect is Herod is this he's like the president of the United States. And so
Right.
to compare yourself to that feels like a disconnect. But really when it comes to the heart condition, they're pretty much accurately the same.
Yeah, because people would be like, I'm way more like, the lowly shepherd, and living, but like reality of when you look at the matter of the heart,
Yes.
the matter of the heart of like Herod, if you think about his life and he, killed members of his family primarily because he thought they were all out to dethrone him
Right.
and take over his palace. When in all reality, you look at other stories of kingdoms, it's like, okay, we need to train you up. So when I'm not going to be here forever. So you need to be able to lead the people well and rule well and govern well. But like Herod's like, no, I'm ending you because if you're coming at my throne, my control, I'm taking you out.
And again, to normalize Herod a little bit, much like we did last week, this was normal, right?
Yeah.
When you were a king, there were many, even David, like King David had some issues with the throne with his family.
Yeah.
Now, there wasn't any slaughter, but like every king in this time period, one of their main priority was to protect their throne. And when family got in the way, they got rid of him, right? I think when David took over and King Saul died, it was like this amazing feat that he didn't slaughter all of Saul's family, right? Because that's just the culture that we lived in.
Right.
Or
Weeping over Absalom, his rebellious son, who he didn't want killed.
Yeah.
But again, David is the example of the good king.
Yes.
Yeah, the good king. Yeah, in that regard. Yeah, and so Herod does everything to maintain control in his life. But we're going to talk more about control later on in the podcast.
I kind of think it would be helpful for the casual reader to get up to date on how many Herods we're talking about if they're reading through, because when we get to the stories of Jesus' crucifixion, there's a Herod there too.
Yeah.
And there's, I guess.
How many are there, Brad?
I don't know. I mean, more than two.
I want to say there's
that.
like 8 to 12.
8 to 12.
Is that a title? Is it a name? Is it?
So I do believe Herod is a title. I read a bunch about this in seminary, and it's like vaguely in the top of my head, but not clear.
Yeah.
I know his father was Herod, and he's like taking over a fourth of his father's kingdom. And so there were other Herods, and there's Herods in the Bible. Daniel, are you Googling?
Is it Herod?
Yep, I am.
Is it
I'm
Herod
looking.
Antipas? Is that the
more.
one who's John the Baptist's enemy? Which Herod is?
Well, there's
faces off
Antipas, there's Agrippa, there's. We digress.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
Really fast. Thanks for that, Brad.
But
Yeah,
none
Herod
of
the
as
Great,
far as we know, none of the Herods are good role models.
According to the Britannica, and so which is I went to just a history website instead of like Bible.org, right? And so just saying, because I wanted like not necessarily a credible source, not that the Bible websites aren't credible, but I wanted more of a historical background. That's why I'm citing Britannica. And so the Herod the Great, or Herod Magnus, is the Herod that is alive and ruling during the time of Jesus' birth.
Yes.
And then you have one thing to just remember in these lines, that all these rulers would, a common practice, even in Egyptian rulers and in Roman rulers, they would even change their name to match a ruler that they admired. And so the reason we have multiple Herods is because Herod was seen as a great ruler because of what he did for the kingdom. And so other Herods either changed their name or were named after him because he was seen as a good ruler in some regard. In the same way, we have multiple Caesars because Caesar Augustus was seen as the greatest Roman ruler in this regard. And so the reason that we have some of those is just because one of two things: either they were named after him, or they could change their name to be named after another ruler that they said, "Oh, he was good. I want people to think of him when they think of me too, because I admired him." In the same way, if you're a preacher or a basketball player, like, "Oh, I'm going to name my son Charles Spurgeon because I want people to, him to be like Charles Spurgeon." Like, obviously, I didn't do that, and others, but that's kind of the equation. The reason there's multiples, when you get down to the end of Jesus' life, Herod died. We know that because you read the end of Matthew chapter 2. That's the reason they can return back to Nazareth and Galilee. They go back home because those who sought your life are now dead. But okay, you keep reading in the Gospels, the end of Jesus' story, he goes back to a Herod. And so it's like, wait, he's back? Like, is he back from the dead? Like, but that's kind of...
It's like a title. It really is. It's almost like a word that means ruler.
Yeah, it's a symbol of that. And so, that's helpful in that regard. But let's talk about the other characters. Other characters, a little biblical background, the Magi, or the wise men, your translations might say. First question, how many of them were there?
It's a great question.
We three kings?
Traditionally, we see three because they offer three gifts. So we just assume that there's three guys on camels with three separate gifts, individual gifts. But realistically, no one knows, right? Scholars might make suggestions, but those suggestions are rooted maybe on some speculation. So we don't know.
We just know that there were three gifts.
And Magi is one of those words where, like, what's the plural of Magi? Is it Magi's? It's like not the greatest. Like, if they were like, three, like kings came, we'd know, there's more than one. It could have been one guy. Like, is Magi plural?
That's a great question.
I don't know the answer to that.
We are throwing so many curveballs at Daniel.
Some curveballs right now. Now, it is wise men, but Magi, which is the word that's used... So let's just look this word up.
That sounds
really
singular
fast.
and plural to me.
It is a...
That's what I thought, too.
It literally just means mag, and then it literally means...
Well done. So glad you tuned in.
Wise men, magician is another way to think about this word.
Astrologer.
Yeah. And so... Is it a sin to look at astrology? That's the other question that gets come up.
Yeah.
And so, but the word, you're asking about the tense of the word. The tension is this is a noun.
Yeah.
And so.
So to answer your question, we don't know. Basically, there could have been one. There could have been 2, 3, 4. We don't know.
Yeah.
But realistically, it doesn't matter, right? We know that there were astrologers or an astrologer or wise men or men that came to worship Jesus, offer him gifts for who he was. Right. Yeah. And they live in stark contrast to the other king in the narrative, Herod, that lives completely different.
But they're pagan, foreign astrologers who get it.
Now, what's the tension though is this. So I think we can know that there are multiple, and this is just me doing studying on the fly and reading, and only because in verse 2, when they, at least the words Matthew records that they said to King Herod is we saw. So there is a plural verb that is used that means to see. And it is in the plural tense, and so it's like
I would definitely assume there's more.
So there's
one.
more than one, and we know, but like it could be like, hey, me and you, 2 of us, or it could be like the 10 of us, or the 3 of us. Maybe there were 3 in that regard because they all wanted to carry one gift. But like in that tense of, so we can know there are more than one because we saw his star rose, and we've come to worship him, and that's what their purpose of coming. But when did they come? That's the question. There's a lot of scholars. And I've even preached this sermon. The first sermon I ever preached at the last church I served at was on this text. And I cited people who thought Jesus was older because Jesus is no longer in the cave or the barn until further study.
I think there's another. Is there not another argument too that that the star appears at the time of his birth, and then the astrologers travel.
Yep.
So it is. So that is. Time has to pass for them to travel to, Jerusalem, have their encounter with Herod, get to Bethlehem. So that creates a time gap.
Yeah.
And the closest thing that gives us a pretty significant indication is Herod's decree to kill babies 2 and under. So we can easily, basically reason that Jesus is 2 and under.
Yeah.
Right. So we know that he's going to be in that, what I would call baby to toddler region.
Yeah. So he's not a preemie.
Yes.
Okay.
I mean, he could. What's hard about the Bible is you read it sequentially and you just think, oh, Jesus is born. Now the wise men come. So like Jesus is like, he's
so
like
you're messing up our nativity a little bit.
Yeah.
You're messing up our nativity. So they weren't there. What you're saying is what we can know is they were not there the night he was born, like the shepherds were.
Right.
Yes, I think we can easily know that. I think
so.
The
Kick them out of your yard.
Came,
them
or
off
just
your
put
mantle.
the Magi at a distance.
Like, hey, they're
Right.
well,
like,
hey,
so you got the scene, and
this
then
would be
the
the best.
Magi with Herod over top.
Put them in your neighbor's
Herod
yard.
is coming, and so is the Magi.
So you kind of need your whole living room or your whole yard.
Yeah.
To do this.
That's what most
Involve
people.
your neighbors.
So if you
you
put
spread it out over the block.
you put this accurately for the Bible, you have kind of rearranged the barn to make it more look like a first century house, upstairs, downstairs, okay? And then you put the Magi kind of maybe in the backyard because they're traveling. Make sure you do it from the east so they can travel that directionally correctly. And then you have Herod off in the distance with a sword, as Drew likes to say. So have him with a sword. Kick the donkey out because he's not there.
I mean, there's no evidence that there wasn't a donkey, so I feel like that's unfair to the donkey. He could have been there. He could have
been there, but he was already
maybe
there.
put a question mark on his butt.
Question mark on the donkey.
The pile of dead babies might get a rise out of your neighbors.
Probably don't do the pile of dead babies like my New Testament professor wanted. So we can know that they weren't there the same night, but they at least showed up there in the first 2 years. So here's my second question, though. So did Mary and Joseph and Jesus, newborn Jesus, infant Jesus, just hang out in Bethlehem for almost 2 years?
I think, they could. I think, realistically, think about the birth of a child just in our culture. Like, most families aren't going out, especially first child. They're taking their good old time.
You don't think she's doing a 4-day walk back?
No, exactly. Remember, Mary has to recover. Mm-hmm. And she ain't, it takes women a good amount of time to recover with modern medicine. This is not modern medicine day. She just gave birth to a child. She's going to need to recover. The baby's going to need to, recover, get healthy, all these things.
There's also things tied to the Jewish law that they have to fulfill. In the sense of Jesus on day 7 is his purity.
Yep.
And then he gets circumcised on day 8.
Yep.
And then Mary has to wait until they dedicate him on day 40 at the temple so that she is ritually clean and pure, ritually pure.
Yes.
So that she can go and dedicate him at the temple in Jerusalem. And it just doesn't make sense if you're playing this out logically, thinking about the fact that she just had a baby to say, they had him a few days later, they travel back to Nazareth, and then on day 8, they're going to make the travel. Or even if you say that he was circumcised and then they traveled, okay, they're going to turn around like a week later, travel back to Jerusalem to dedicate him at the temple, which we know they do because of Luke chapter 2. They meet Anna and Simeon, the prophetess and the prophet, like they meet them at the temple when they go to dedicate Jesus in Jerusalem. So we know they did that.
Bethlehem is close to Jerusalem.
Yeah, it's so much closer
very,
than,
very close.
than Nazareth
is
all the way
way
at the top.
up the Jordan River.
Yep.
And so
and the travel time of the Magi.
Yeah.
Right. It's not like they're coming. It says we don't know exactly where they're coming from, but it's probably a significant journey. Mm-hmm. So you've got travel time for them. So I think there's a lot of things that indicate Jesus is probably older than what we would think. I don't know if he's probably quite 2 years old. 2 years seems like a long time.
I imagine Herod had a margin for error.
Yes,
right? Like
exactly.
If he thought the baby was a year old, he's going to go 2 and under.
That's right. So I think, 6-8 months to a year could be an accurate hypothesis.
Yeah. Which, if you think about my sermon last week too, of if they do stay in Bethlehem for say a year because of this baby, because of how extensive the journey is, or even just 3 months, like just let's say the minimum the age of Jesus, the youngest he could have been with all these events to transpire, he's 40 days old, or a month and a half, 2 months old. Think about the hospitality of the family that does take him in, of just like, yeah, y'all hang out here. You're good. Like, it raises their hospitality, but it also raises more questions in my mind of like, well, did they eventually come around? Did they respond to Jesus? Did they? We don't have anything recorded. Did they just hang out for months thinking like, is this really the new king?
Well, and even in your message, you did the whole like knock and the shepherds come, and you're like, okay, that might have been coincidence, right? And then,
but what if Magi
show up? Like, who what is this? People? What is going on?
Gold, frankincense, like it's
that might go to the top of my questions in heaven for Jesus, right? Like, yo, can I meet the family that is the family
who
that hosted you?
Who hosted
here?
you? You know, and so that just brings another level of like, are they here right
exactly?
Now? Did they end up turning like? Did they? And so like that just brings so many questions in my mind in that regard of. So there's some things we can know, but there's also some things left to mystery of what the biblical text presents as apparently what the writers thought was pertinent for us to know, but there's some things if we put some puzzle pieces on the board we can know better.
Well, and even if you think about Jesus as a baby, I've always wondered this is going to complicate things more. Yes, he is God, but he's also human. Was there any complications? Was there any, did Jesus have struggles when did he get an RSV when he was a baby? Did he have a cough, right? Like, were they getting ready to leave and God kept him there because
think he didn't cry? He didn't even cry.
I'm sure I guarantee.
What's that Christmas song that says that? There's
no crying he makes.
No crying he makes. What song is that?
That's Away in a Manger.
Yeah, that's right. Okay. I knew that line is in there. I was like,
I'm here for the old stuff.
Yeah. Thanks, Brad. Yeah, I love that. Well, let's put it more in people's laps. We've riffed on the background of possibilities in that regard. Your whole thrust, which we talked about a little bit in the beginning of this podcast, was about the control that Herod sought after. And what kind of control are you talking about? Is there just one kind of control for our lives, or are there layers to control, different types, if you will, of control?
Yeah, I definitely think there's multiple layers, even spiritual layers. Like the first is like ultimate control.
Okay.
Who has the final say in your life? When it comes to who you are and the things that you choose. Who are you listening to? Who is that authority in your life? Is it Jesus and his word to us, or is it what you feel or what you decide? Like, who is that ultimate control? And then I think there's layers to it of, I guess like what's hard for people too, and even for me, is like, does that mean I gotta like pray about whether I have my family or not? Like, does God have control over that? Yes and no, realistically. Like, yeah, God wants to say in every area of your life, but he also gives you some freedom to control certain things, right? And so I think, we have to learn to live in those tensions of God has the final say, but sometimes God gives me the freedom to choose and have
gives
some
you wisdom
control.
through his Holy Spirit.
Is stewardship a good word? I mean, it's just like he's ultimately in control, but he wants us to manage.
Yes.
That.
He's given us responsibility. If you think of
responsibility, management.
Right now, Rena and I, my wife, we're reading a book together by Dr. Henry Cloud called Boundaries. Like how you can set good. It's a really classic book. It's been recommended to us so many times. But just how every type of relationship, there are healthy boundaries that you can put in place to be a good, and it's written from a very Christian perspective. He's given you a robust, almost theology of what does it mean to love someone else well, but yet setting good boundaries, and he kind of like takes biblical stories and the one that is just fresh in my mind is because I read the chapter yesterday, was on the Good Samaritan. He's like, in the Good Samaritan, what if he didn't have boundaries, and he takes the man to the inn, lays him in the inn, and he's like, all right, I got business to go take care of, which is what he says in the text, what Jesus apparently says in the text, that he had business to take care of, and he's like, when I come back, I'll pay you whatever it takes, innkeeper, an actual innkeeper, right? Whatever it took, whatever you needed, right? But what if the man, comes to, and he's like, don't leave me. I need you to stay. And he's like, okay, I need to love you well, so I'll stay. He gives up control, right? He's like, God knows, he knows God wants me to love this person, right? He wants me to love this person. I'm going to love this person. But the sacrifice he had to make was he didn't go and do his business. So he doesn't have any money to actually pay for the guy to get taken care of.
Yeah.
And so he like walks through like what could have happened because this guy didn't have good boundaries, because his whole gut reaction was like, well, what you want is before my needs. What you need. And so it's a good illustration in my mind of like, there's two types of control, right? We need to use wisdom to set appropriate levels of, as Brad said, stewardship over our lives, our finances, our relational capacity. What does it mean to love other people well and make sacrifices? But yet, like, it's not just like everyone else's wants, needs, and desires are in front of mine all the time, always. And I'm just going to be very unhealthy because I'm stretched during this season, this holiday. Everybody needs a gift. Everybody needs my time. Everybody needs all these things. Like, what you want goes over me. And I think that's like that. This idea of control is like salvation and sanctification are so like merged together when it comes to control. Because salvation is the moment where you give God control over your life, but that doesn't mean that you just in a moment, oh, God, you control everything. No, we're still flawed human beings. And so this process of salvation is I'm surrendering my heart and control to you, God. You're sitting on the throne. Sanctification is learning in every area of my life to continue to surrender that control, because we live in this tension of like, God, I give you control, but I'm still going to be like Herod throughout the rest of my life of like trying to pull it back, trying to grasp it back. And in this sanctification process where God makes you more like him, it's just you keep surrendering. And you see that in Jesus, right? Even in the Garden of Gethsemane, you see it all throughout. I'm here to do my Father's will, not my will, but your will. And it's and we
Jesus
follow in Jesus' footsteps
control
of how he did that. And there's this whole tension of even what I just said in the book that my wife and I were talking about last night is like, we live in this, self-help, I need a me day culture. And there's a tension that you wrestle through of like, there's an unhealthy version of boundaries where you do nothing and you never give of yourself, because it's like, I need to protect me. But Jesus always was sticking his neck out on the line for other people. But it takes time, wisdom, and of the Holy Spirit to be able to know when is it time to set a boundary, when is it time to to give up control to God, and God saying like, no, you need to breathe. You need to be with me. You need to be like Mary in Mary and Martha's story. Like, you don't need to be busy working. You need to be sitting at my feet and then go and do good works, which those stories in Luke's gospel are back to back, right? They're literally separated by, in our English Bibles, one header. But they're really one connected story of Jesus illustrating how the two primary goals of our life is to love God and love people. Sit at his feet and love people well. But it takes time and wisdom to know, like, when it comes to control, we give ultimate control to Jesus over our life, and we learn to follow in his footsteps of what it looks like to love people and appropriate times to take and give up control.
There's a beautiful freedom in the gospel, I think. You just think about, it's really that fear that creeps in and consumes us, where we want to control the outcomes. But to be able to say, hey, I'm serving the King, and the King will accomplish what he's going to accomplish. He's included me in this. I've got his priorities. He's given me resources. But there's a freedom there when you're trusting the King. But that fear is always creeping back into me. No,
I need control. I need
my
control.
401k needs to be a little higher. I need to insulate myself against all bad outcomes.
Yeah.
Right? But that fear will always creep in on me.
Yeah, so don't let fear. Yeah. What's one takeaway as we wrap up? 10 seconds for each one of us. What's one thought that we want to leave people with in that regard? Brad?
I just think it's, what a bad idea it is for me to be king. It's just, it's almost that impulse, almost that instinct. It sits underneath there, but it's like I have to be continually reminded. Do you understand that if you're setting the priorities, you're going to think you can imagine every outcome. You're going to think that you're smart enough for this, but the outcomes could be disastrous. They will be disastrous.
Yeah, you were not designed for control, right? You're a second fiddle, so that's what.
That's a great place to just wrap us up here as we think about this Christmas season of Jesus is the one that's supposed to be in control. So thanks so much for tuning in to this week of A Little Better. A public service announcement. We'll be taking the next 2 weeks off. We can't wait to hang out with you in the new year with a new series all on how our identity is supposed to be rooted in God. See you then.